bring out President Michael Crow and our first panel this morning. We are really excited to bring them all out. We'll be bringing out Michael Crow. He'll be joined by 4 guests. We have Katie Kurtz from Global Head of Education at YouTube. We have Hank Green, who's a science communicator and co-founder of Crash Course. We have Danielle Bainbridge, assistant professor of theater at Northwestern. And they will all be here to talk about the role of YouTube in creating equity in higher education. So without further ado, please welcome President Crow and our panel.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're here to sort of deal with a dilemma of numbers, and so we have a country that in the relatively short time frame will break 350 million people. We have an educational system that is educating some of them sometimes and significantly in inadequate ways as we move along, and so there are technologies that have come along that have enabled us to reach basically almost everyone all the time with ubiquitous information across all dimensions of learning in every possible way. And there is, in the formal, organized educational arena, huge resistance to that notion of highly egalitarian, highly democratic, highly autodidactic empowerment through new kinds of learning systems. And so obviously, Katie's over there looking at global learning at YouTube. YouTube has, I don't know, like billions upon billions upon billions of something. I know when I watch my son watch YouTube, he mostly is watching all these things about how things fail. It's just fail, 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 fail. And it is kind of sad to watch. But so Katie, why don't we start with why does YouTube want to make certain that its capabilities are useful in terms of helping people to not only learn, which they certainly do through YouTube, but to learn in ways that then attach to the more formal, recognized learning processes? So what's behind YouTube's logic?
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Michael, for inviting us all to share this stage with you to talk about a project that we all love and feel very passionate about, Study Hall. I include you in the we on that. You and I have worked together on projects for the last, I guess since 2010 when we met at the first ASU+GSV summit. Right. And so much of the learnings of those last 10 years of thinking about education and quality at scale are really informing this project. So YouTube, as you mentioned, has 2 billion users. 93% of them say they use the platform for knowledge and information. And so we were thinking about how we could help empower those users to think through how they could maybe break down barriers to high impact learning experiences. And Study Hall, this project that we have all worked on together, is a great example of that. So just really quickly, what Study Hall is it is a new on-ramp to earning college credit that begins and was built for YouTube. It's a 3-part content series of college foundations courses. These are some of the most commonly found college courses in the US at least. How to college and fast guides to majors and electives, so that taken together, a learner understands why they are taking certain courses, and the How to College and fast guides has demystified and contextualize the content within those courses, so it's part of a whole. And the learnings that are informing this project are that just increasing accessibility and affordability do not ensure student success. And we've learned that inspiration, motivation have to be pieces of that puzzle. And I think that's where YouTube comes into play. Of our 2 billion users that are working on the platform, how can we help them take that love of learning, that motivation to learn on their own, because the only thing that unites these 2 billion users that are learning all over the world on YouTube is that they've chosen to be there. How do we take that love of learning in an informal setting and create a pathway, a channel, to more external recognition for your learning. The bridge between
Not just more external recognition, but more ways to project the autodidactic learning that you have been able to implement yourself. So.
Absolutely. We think of it as the bridge between informal learning to formal education, or curiosity to credits. But the other insight, I think, is that also learning is better when done with a community.
Yeah.
And that's where Crash Course comes into place. Yeah. Hank and the Crash Course team, since in the last 12 years, have built one of the most influential channels on the platform. Not just learning channels, but just channels, period, with a community of almost 15 million subscribers, and I have lost count of how many billions of views. And they are among the very best at thinking through how to create educational video and create a strong community of support around that video.
Yeah, so related to that, Hank, I mean, you're living up in Missoula, Montana. You go to college in Florida. You're floating around working with your brother and working with other people. I mean, so what is this Crash Course thing? How does it work? Why did you build it? What does it do? And then I'm going to try to figure out why a professor of theater from Northwestern is somehow involved in all of this. So Hank.
Yeah, so my brother and I started out as YouTubers. Our goal was to get views on YouTube, because the more views.
Well, there's lots of ways to do that. Did you use the healthier ways, or?
I mean, I'm not going to show you every single video I've ever made on YouTube, just for my own reputation.
Oh, thank you.
But we started from that perspective. You have more impact. You reach more people. It starts to be like, now why are we doing this though? And we occasionally would make a video that was sort of more educationally oriented.
Like what's an example of more educationally oriented?
I mean, at one point we had to make, so the rules of our show were we had to make a video every day for the first year. And at one point you just run out of ideas. And so I was a biochemistry major, and I was like, well, why don't I just make a video on a high school biology subject. So I made a video about the circulatory system. It was way more work than the average video, but it did better than the average video. And it was using all of the same tricks and tools I had learned to keep people's attention in a very sort of attention demanding environment. There's a sidebar of videos, there's comments, there's Reddit on the other tab, there's your emails are ready to get you as well. And so we're using those techniques, but also trying to convey ideas. I taught a little course on statistics from the perspective of birth control. I was like, so if it's a 1 in 100 chance that that a condom will fail, then does that mean if you have sex 100 times you're gonna get pregnant? And no, but that's that's a thing that a student might think. But understanding statistics through that lens, it becomes very important. Take that one with you. I'm sure that the school systems will love it. So sort of thinking, how do we do a good? How do we also seem more credible? Honestly, because we were YouTubers.
So what is this thing about credible? What does that mean?
So I mean, when we started out on YouTube, everybody who we were creating with, they were like, "This is my path to get into television." Wow. My parents don't know what this is. My grandparents don't know what this is. If I was writing for a magazine, they'd be proud of me, but I'm a YouTuber, and so they aren't. Yeah. And and
do you think that worked out for a lot of them?
No. I'm glad that you put your finger on that, because they didn't. It took a long time for people to figure that out. And now, being a YouTuber is a very high status career for a lot of young people. There's influence and money that comes along with it. That in 20.
So what kind of people are coming to study hall? Who's using it, and why is there a need for talent on study hall?
So what we found was once we had started making some of these videos, we actually got a big pot of money from Google, because they also wanted there to be educational content and to increase the status of their platform, I think, to be less about cat videos and more about everything. And
with that, you'd be an N of 1, but keep going.
There's a lot of good stuff. And we started making this show using these techniques we knew. And we also didn't want it to be just us. It shouldn't just be two brothers who had a particular perspective, and also we had other things. You can't scale a human being. So we started, yes, this morning I had when I was checked in, got my badge, which I'm not wearing. The woman was like, "You work for Crash Course?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "I love Crash Course." And I was like, "But you don't recognize me because we have so many different people who teach Crash Course now." No. But we do it with the same perspective of how do you keep people's attention? How do you perform in the space where you are a performer? Your job is to teach, but also to be entertaining and to hold people's attention.
Yeah, so then related to that, Danielle, you end up in Evanston at Northwestern University where you freeze your tail off in the winter there with the winds coming off the lake. You're in the theater program and the communications program there. So how do you tie into all of this? And then what's the relationship between massive audiences of billions of people, Crash Course sort of focal activities, and then enhancing learning outcomes? So you're putting your life energy into this. So what are you doing?
So I started making video on YouTube in 2017. I actually got reached out to by someone who is a casting director at PBS because I was getting my PhD in American Studies and African American Studies with a focus in history. And they were trying to launch what they called an untitled history show at that point. And I was writing for general audiences and putting it on this very poorly designed WordPress site with like broken links and no way to contact me. So they left a voicemail on our department.
Great. Well, they call it the department phone.
Yeah, on the department phone, they left a voicemail and they were like, "Is there someone here named Danielle Bainbridge? We're looking for her. We're from PBS." And the administrator and I listened to the message together and then just burst out laughing. I was like, "Oh, this is definitely a scam for lonely academics who want to, and they're gonna ask me for my bank number or something, and then I'm gonna get scammed into this vortex and it'll lead me down a dark path." So I decided I wasn't gonna call back. And I talked to my mother, and she said, "In case it's not a scam, just try calling them back." And it turned out it was for real. So I developed a show called Origin of Everything, where basically my objective was to take cultural studies, racial history, all sorts of different aspects of our complex, shared narrative, and give them to a general audience. So in our second and third season, we actually partnered with Complexly, Hank's company, to produce the show. And so when I got signed on to study hall, I actually knew Katie, I knew Hank, and I got a email, again, another email that I was like, should I respond to this? And in it was embedded a video of Hank just talking about some of the issues in higher education. And I thought, that's great. Like, I want to be a part of that. I want to be part of a really actionable solution. And I think a lot of my approach as a learner when I was going through the college process was that college was a competitive process. Like, it was a game that I had to win against other students.
Yeah, right.
I had to beat out other people to get into the best program, and then, things would be a certain way. And by the time I was in grad school, I was actually really disenchanted with that model. I felt like I was often on the wrong end of that competitive attitude, especially amongst my peers. Mm-hmm. And
your fellow students.
Yeah, fellow students. And I thought, I wanted to do something that felt meaningful to me, that felt like I was bringing education to a wider audience. And I think one of the things that I always tell folks is that when I approach a learner online, I just say, we both have the same intelligence, we both have the same capacity, we've just read different books.
Yeah,
and my point is to bring
let's bore in on that for a second, because you're sitting here as a person living in these two worlds. So you have your regular students at Northwestern, you've got your regular programs that you've got underway. You're in this highly selective student body population there, and you're obviously not satisfied with that alone. So now you're doing this in terms of advancing new ways of teaching and learning across a much broader audience. So why is that so hard for people to understand that we ought to be doing both?
Well, I think one of the challenges is, it's multifold, but I think one of the challenges is that universities are slow-moving engines, oftentimes.
Some of them.
Some of them, not ASU.
Yeah.
But some of them are very slow-moving engines, so it takes a long time to turn the ship around. And there's this sense of, we have to protect our brand, our identity, our exclusivity, our esteem and elitism.
But what's at the root of that? What do you think is at the root of that? Because it's actually a psychological part of the complexity of this more open source, open scale, wide scale learning. What do you think is at the root of that?
I think it's at the root of that is that's the way we approach education in the US. And I think most of us who went through educational programs in the US were taught that the more selective the program, the better it was. And that somehow if we made it there against other people, like we're in competition with other learners, if we make it against other people, somehow we've succeeded, we've achieved something. And I think that was really at the core of it. And so also most professors, I mean, I'm not bad-mouthing my colleagues, but most of us have never had another type of career.
Right.
So we only see things through the lens of what we've been taught by other people who've only had that career.
So let's talk about this thing about competition. So in the broader YouTube environment, there certainly is competition among and between content developers. There's certainly all forms of capitalistic competition that's underway. So how does YouTube more broadly, facilitate, maybe not even consciously, but how does it facilitate success in the kind of market economy that we live in? I mean, and then, what are some of the motivations for this emphasis now on bringing a little bit of structure to the learning process? So let's look at those two aspects.
Well, I think we are just a distribution platform for the content, right? Like the amazing part of what happens on YouTube is that you have all of these people who are connecting with users in a very personal way. And that's not just true of learning content, right? That's just true across the, but I think that I've been hearing a lot yesterday at this conference about meeting learners where they are. And I say that all the time too, but I do wonder if we all actually mean the same thing when we say that.
Right.
I'll give you an example. How many people in this room have a child that's in college or high school? I have 3 in high school. So I made a bet with Sean Hobson, Chief Design Officer at Ed Plus at ASU and keeper of all the study hall stickers that we're all wearing. I made a bet that if you all texted your child right now, which you shouldn't because they're in school, he said that 70% of those kids would say that they had used Crash Course and it had helped them get through, a quiz, a test.
You guys do it.
I know that number is much higher. I know he's wrong. When I told my teenage daughter, that I was going to get to meet Hank and John Green,
What happened?
she cried. She was like, why can't you bring me with you? And we saw this yesterday. Someone walked up to Hank as he was getting into the elevator.
He
and
wouldn't let the door close. It was beeping.
It was literally, and he was like, I need to thank you because I went to Princeton, but you're the one who really taught me biology. And so, well done. But we don't do that, right? Like we're not the ones, it's the creators who are creating that connection. And so when we talk about meeting learners where they are, we are talking about more than just distributing information. We're talking about empowerment, we're talking about building confidence, we're talking about people feeling like they can be seen in the teachers that they're working.
Well, Hank or Danielle, so what is it about this notion that somehow along the way, human beings are really creatures of learning? We're, even sapien in the phrase Homo sapien, seeker of knowledge, that we're a knowledge-driven creature, we're a learning-driven creature, and we've decided to formalize and classify and make class-based all kinds of things that we're doing. And so here we have this huge tool for democratization, this huge tool for enhancing equitable access to learning outcomes. In fact, you could find a way using YouTube, connected through Crash Course, connected to colleges and universities, including ASU, you could find a way to plot your own course outside of the entire formal education process. And so again, why is this so hard? I guess let's just hear one more thing, Katie, from you in terms of YouTube's motivation. I mean, I know from you and others that we've talked to that there is a social purpose motivation here. We just don't want empowerment through basically delivery of content with no concern about whatever the net outcomes are. And since once we know now that there are people capable of learning on these systems at unbelievable scale, why wouldn't we facilitate this even more and help to empower this? So what's behind this particular motivation in terms of linking up and organizing just a little bit the knowledge process?
Well, I guess when I started at YouTube about four years ago, all of this learning was happening, and it was all happening in this very organic way. But it was beloved, right? Like it's one of the experiences that users have on the platform that is the most satisfying. And it did feel like if you could add just a little bit of intentionality, maybe you wouldn't break what made that experience so special.
So just a little bit of intentionality as well as connection. So we view this as sort of a Lego problem. How do we get all these different Legos and all of the knowledge that's out there and learning activities that are out there, and how do we find ways that somebody can build their own Lego outcome?
Absolutely, and actually one of the main design principles that's behind Study Hall is this notion of because of all of this intrinsic motivation, this autodidactic learning experience, there tends to be this notion sometimes, I think, in some of us who've been in more formal education settings, is that like supplemental learning is important, but it's supplemental to the core.
Yeah.
And what if actually for the learner, the supplement is the core?
What if it was the opposite? You were learning the way that you want to learn. Now there are certain things that we need everybody to learn, why is democracy important and things like that. And so that goes without saying, but we do have a highly structured system. So Hank, just talk a little bit about where you see this going. Where are things headed?
Well, oh gosh.
Like, why are you working with universities now?
Yeah, so first thing I'll say is in this conversation that y'all are having right now, there's this thing that I feel every time somebody says, you taught me this topic, which is that I don't, teaching is a lot of things, and I'm doing one of them.
And teaching and learning are not the same thing.
And in that situation, I think that person's basically saying, I went to Princeton, and ultimately I taught myself a lot of biology, and I used some of the tools that you created to do that. And that feels very good to me, and I think that's the more sort of accurate way of saying.
So the way we would see that is that not everyone learns in the same way. Everyone learns in different ways, and if they teach biology at whatever college you go to in a certain way, you might not be able to learn it in that way, but you could learn it in another way.
Yeah, there's also a huge amount of value in figuring out how to teach yourself.
Yeah.
And that's, we all do that. Every human does that, but we sort of, put it to the side because
But given where you started,
robust.
where are you headed?
So right now, what we did for 10 years on Crash Course is we made a thing and we left it there. And that was great. And I like that strategy. We say if this is useful for a student, if it's useful for a teacher, if it's useful for a parent, it's
How many
there.
people found it in that model?
I mean, probably at least tens of millions, maybe over 100 million. And they're everywhere. We have
all over the planet.
Our second biggest country is India. And then when the EDU team at YouTube first introduced us to ASU, honestly, people see Crash Course in it, in the ed tech industry, and it makes them drool. Of course it does. And we're very nervous about that. That's we're very nervous about partnerships. We're very nervous about these relationships because people have, honestly, not always great motivations in this industry.
Well, they often have one motivation.
Yeah.
Money.
Yeah, and it's good to have more than one.
Yes.
And so I, you can smell it sometimes, and so we're really nervous about that. And also institutions, universities, oftentimes do have the best of intentions, but they're slow and hard to work with.
Yeah.
So when that introduction happened, I was like, eh. And my dad was like, I think you should take these guys seriously. I read about them. It's different. They're thinking about this differently.
Thanks to your dad now. I'm really excited.
You should meet him. You'd like him. He's very cool. I think you've had some career overlaps.
Yes,
I bet. It's scary for us to say, okay, how do we actually?
So what's the scary part? When you say scary, what do you mean by that?
The scary part is that I understand what problem I'm solving when I'm making a video on YouTube. I'm trying to get the YouTube algorithm to say, I'm trying to get the YouTube algorithm to get the inputs from people that are going to watch the video, they're going to comment on the video, they're going to share the video, they're going to watch another video after the one they've watched. All those inputs that are going to make it more likely that people are going to see our content.
Yeah.
And I'm also trying to teach people. So I'm trying to do both of those things at the same time. That's easy. There's a lot a lot of problems that you can solve if you want to be in the higher education industry. That's why there are so many different businesses solving problems.
Right.
And we have to figure out what problem we want to solve. And that was tricky. You know, if we wanted to make the most money, I know exactly what problem we'd try to solve. And that's how do you help rich kids have, like, you know, a higher, like, get into a higher status school or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, how do you help rich kids?
Yes.
That's the problem you want to solve.
Because people will give you money for lots of money for that, right?
Because if you have a B2C thing and you can build that and somebody will buy it for a lot of money. But the problem that, you know, if you had a thing like Crash Course, imagine what you would do with it. Like, we didn't mean to build this thing that would be like, we just were trying to solve one problem.
Yeah.
But now we have this thing that a lot of people think could help their business, or like, what do you do with that?
Right.
And the first conversations we had with the people on your team were like, what you want to do with that is try and reach the people who are being let down by the system.
Right.
And there are
The
lots of
inequities
ways.
in our system.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they understood that way better than I did. And they helped me understand that. It really quite quickly. But you know, the stuff they helped me understand was very complicated.
Yeah.
And from that understanding is where
Yeah.
is like the different sort of three big pieces of study hall came from.
Right. So Danielle, you've been looking at this, you know, from lots of different angles. So you get to graduate school, you begin to see that maybe this isn't the best system. You've already invested a lot of time in graduate school, so you're gonna finish, and then sort of stay on this track. Then you end up at one of these behemoth institutions, you know, where you're advancing things, but then you've got this other skill set, this ability to reach out and communicate and connect, and so forth and so on. And so how do we get more of this going? I mean, really, like, how do we get more people, more energy in these directions? How do we bring more equity order to the system that now is completely capable of now overcoming all of the limits of the existing system? What are your ideas about that?
Well, I think some of my ideas are just showing people that this is really viable, it's vibrant, it's not, I think oftentimes when people who were trained in traditional systems think of public-facing work, they think it's dumbed down. So it's not as, and the word rigor is one that
They definitely think of that. Think of a person like Carl Sagan, who was abused by other academics because he wrote books like Contact and wrote other kinds of things to get people to understand astronomy and so forth. And he was abused within the academic world. So.
But it's exactly like that. I mean, the word rigor just makes me so crazy because it's usually utilized to say, well, things that are behind paywalls, things that are exclusive, things that aren't accessible to everyone are more rigorous, and things that are accessible to everyone are dumbed down, watered down, they're not as strict. And I actually think if we can change that mindset and show other people, you know, who have, you know, expertise that this work is equally valuable, if not more valuable, than some of the things that we do that are behind these restrictive paywalls, that will actually get more people involved. And I also tell, you know, folks generally that I study history because I'm bad at predicting the future. And one of my worst predictions that I ever made, other than that the Soulja Boy dance had too many moves for people to get into it, one of the worst predictions I ever made was when I was 16 and I learned what YouTube was, and I said, well, that'll never last. And I was like, oh, this website is so goofy. Like, it's just people talking about cat videos or making, you know, watching video. The person who introduced it to me, he said he watched videos of snakes eating mice. And that was all he was doing on YouTube. And I thought, well, that's a flash in the pan.
That's more of a him problem.
Yeah, it was very much a him problem.
As opposed to, you could ask it for a visualization of literally almost anything.
Yeah.
And have multiple variations of those visualizations immediately.
6 different people can tell me how to fix my washing machine.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like the one I have.
Or how to change. I used it the other day to change the battery in my Volvo key of my 13-year-old Volvo because it didn't work anymore and I couldn't get into the car. So.
Yeah. But it's exactly that. I think so many people, at least myself included, thought of YouTube as kind of this, you know, Wild West space where people were just posting whatever. And I think actually one of the ways of sort of changing people's opinion or changing their orientation towards the platform are products like Study Hall, where we're doing high quality video, fact-checked, rigorous, well, now I'm using the word.
Yeah, I mean, I just wrote that down. It's,
you know, like that we're doing something that has lots of value for lots
Yeah,
of learners.
yeah.
And actually, I would say sometimes the online learners I have are more appreciative of the content than even my students in the classroom. My students in the classroom sometimes are completely disenchanted with me and my corny sense of humor, but online learners will come up to me and say, you know, you really helped me explain this complex social dynamic to my parents. Or I really figured out something very important about our collective story, our narrative as a nation from watching your videos, and I'm really grateful.
So one of the things I think that I know the audience here has probably thought about this, but you know, we have 20%, 30% in some communities, 40% in others, but roughly 20% of the kids don't finish high school in the United States. We blame that mostly on the kid, or we blame it on the neighborhood. We blame it on the parents. We never blame it on the teachers. We never blame it on the learning structure. We don't and then we've got half the people that go to college and start college in the United States never graduate. Most of the people that have debt have no diploma, no certificate, no outcome. Yet we never have sort of decided that one of the reasons for that is that we have this very limited methodology to the learning environments that we create in organized learning. So what YouTube has found a way to do is to take literally all the knowledge that you could put in some place where it's accessible in a disorganized but searchable sort of format, and then creates an opportunity where we can restructure everything. So what are the ambitions of YouTube? What are the ambitions of Crash Course? What are your ambitions, Danielle? Let's just do that in the last 2 minutes. So when the time comes and you have to explain to your children, you know, what you did with your life, and you're focusing on this kind of equity question that we're talking about right now, what do you want to be able to tell them?
One of my best mentors once told me that as the descendant of immigrant peasants whose lives had been totally transformed by access to education and all of the legacy of people that had come after in our family, that I had a moral imperative to use my life to help more people with economic opportunity advancement and opportunities to help more people up that ladder. And I kind of think that is the challenge for everyone in this room, that we've all chosen to be here because we all know that access to education is important. And the notion of keeping it behind these gated places for it's one of the greatest challenges of our time.
True democratization and true acceleration of equity. So that's your ultimate objective. And so then, Hank, for you and in Crash Course, I mean, now you're bringing order to the form that you've helped build, and you're working in new kinds of ways. Where do you want it to be 20 years from now?
Well, I mean, I think that we have to be honest about America. That there's a reality to, you know, I don't know if this is. It's true in a lot of ways that the greatest predictor of student success is their zip code, which is not there's nothing special about your zip code, but it is a good predictor of how much money is around. Mm-hmm. And that we fund high schools in this country based on property taxes. We need to look that straight in the face and say that's set up for a particular outcome.
Yeah.
But what the future, we can't fix all those problems all at once. There are things we can do and we should be doing them. But the thing that we should be looking forward to in the future is saying there isn't one way to do this. And this has happened I think of teaching as media, which I apologize for, but this has happened in all media, where we get these fractures to better serve different demographics.
Yeah.
And that fracture is happening now. There's not one way to educate students. There are lots of different students with lots of different kinds of needs, and we need to be picking that into little pieces to understand how to best serve those people. And that market is there, it's hungry, it's ready, and there are people who want to solve those problems.
Right.
And I see that as well.
So Danielle, we're 37 seconds past our time limit, so you get to basically use every ounce of the creative energy of the theater department at Northwestern University and all of your life experience to have the last word.
Well, I think one of the future objectives I have is just I see so much of history as analysis and an ability to meet our present moment and the challenges of our present moment. And so I'd love for people to be able to engage with historical thinking, engage with civics, engage with a way of seeing the world that is fully informed. And I think sometimes we think of education, yes, it's connected to economic opportunity, yes, it's connected to advancement, but also I think people who have all the playing cards, like they make better decisions.
Yeah.
They're better people.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of, I mean, maybe it's a little bleeding heart to end on, but it's what I genuinely think.
All right. Well, let's thank the panel and.